Chernobyl Exclusion Zone.
The Chernobyl-Pripyat River is in the temperate zone in Eastern Europe, a climate similar to that of Minnesota. It has many swamps and marshes and a constant flow of water that made it an ideal location for the infamous Chernobyl nuclear plant. Today, the area is open to short tours in less irradiated zones and has become an international hub for studying the effects of ionizing radiation on animals over time. This has led to the discovery of several animals that are becoming resistant to and even benefiting from the ionizing radiation.
The Ukraine is a country in Eastern Europe, and Chernobyl is a city in the northern part of the Ukraine next to Belarus. Excepting the nuclear reactor incident, Chernobyl drew very little attention and is not known for much. However, after the nuclear disaster, it became a household name. The ecosystem we will be studying is the portion of the Pripyat River area inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone. This area of the Pripyat River is very wide, spanning several miles, and is also quite large in length, giving an observer a nice variety of species to look at. The constituents of the food web for the Chernobyl-Pripyat River area are similar to Minnesota because of its similar climate. The producers of this ecosystem are oak trees and radiotropic fungi. The primary consumers are deer, voles, pigeons, squirrels, and catfish. The secondary consumers are owls and wolves, and the lone tertiary consumer is the blue heron. The energy pyramid in the Pripyat River is surprisingly fairly normal, only having 2 layers of consumers and 1 layer of producers. With the producers, oak trees, and radiotropic fungi, taking and producing energy from the sun and receiving 100% of the total energy. The deer, vole, pigeon, squirrel, and mutated catfish eating mainly from those producers and receiving 10% of the total energy, and owls, wolves, and herons being at the top of the energy pyramid and receiving only 1% of the total energy. Radionuclides given off by the Chernobyl disaster contaminated the soil of the Pripyat River and therefore killed many organisms. The nitrogen-fixing bacteria that were not killed by radiation would fixate nitrogen into nitrates, but radiation contaminated the nitrogen. Plants would take up contaminated nitrates that would either kill them if the amount of radiation was too much, or harm their reproductive systems. Consumers would eat the contaminated plants, and they would also simply die of too much radiation or would be harmed by radiation but still be living. The nitrogen cycle shows how this contaminated nitrogen would move about the ecosystem. All arrows with red marks on them are movements of nitrogen that is contaminated by the radiation given off by the nuclear disaster. Because nitrogen goes through an ecosystem in a cycle, every single part of the ecosystem is affected and receives some effect of the radiation.
The radiation from the Chernobyl disaster effectively created an ecosystem unique from any other in several ways. The first is that the radiation killed off the bacteria that rotted wood. As a result, more heavily irradiated areas of the forest were choked out by dead trees and leaves that couldn't rot, killing the forest. However, some were benefiting from the radiation. Some fungi began to produce a pigment that allows them to absorb the radiation and use it for energy to grow. This actually helps the forest as well, because if the pigment is absorbing the radiation, then there's less of it to affect the animals. Another supposed effect is giant catfish. Though scientists don't know how, there are catfish of unusual size swimming in the pools of radioactive water. Many scientists believe that the radioactivity is a factor in their size. Remarkably, these catfish appear to have built a resistance to radioactivity. Many studies are being launched to study these enormous catfish, but so far no explanation has been found.
The explosion of the reactor sent a plethora of radioactive materials and byproducts and bathed the entire region in gamma radiation, killing most of the native species. On top of the initial blast, many of the control methods involved dumping lead and fire-extinguishing fluids, as well as radiation-absorbing materials. These, along with the continual seeping of radioactive materials into the groundwater, continue to affect the ecosystem, killing fish and plants in the river that take up the contaminated water. Many of the animals died from heavy metal poisoning also. In short, the environment will be a long time coming before it's escaped the repercussions of the blast. There isn't much scientists can do for the Chernobyl environment, besides wait for the water in the ground to clean itself, and the radioactive elements to break down. This can only take time.